Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, May 1st, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the UK joins the US in airstrikes on Yemen. So the British military joined the US in airstrikes that hit Yemen on Tuesday night, marking the first time the UK helped the US bomb the country under the Trump administration. So the UK participated in President Biden's Yemen bombing campaign from January 2024 to January 2025, which failed to deter the Houthis. And they stopped their attacks once a ceasefire was reached in January of this year, January 19th, when it went into effect. But the UK was very much a part of Biden's campaign. They didn't participate in every airstrike, but when the US did kind of the more heavy rounds of airstrikes, the British were involved. So this really marks another escalation in this bombing campaign in Yemen under the Trump administration. The British Defense Ministry claimed that its overnight airstrikes targeted a, quote, cluster of buildings used by the Houthis to manufacture drones of the type used to attack ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, located some 15 miles south of Sana'a, end quote. The ministry offered no details about potential casualties. It said, quote, the strike was conducted after dark when the likelihood of any civilians being in the area was reduced yet further, end quote. Yemen's Saba news agency reported that U.S.-British aggression targeted Sana'a as well as the provinces of Sada and Al-Jaf. The Saba report said that a number of civilian homes were damaged by the strikes in a neighborhood of Sana'a. So President Trump's bombing campaign has taken a huge toll on civilians, and the U.S. military has refused to share any details about the over 1,000 strikes it said it launched since March 15th. And on Monday, as we've covered quite a bit, a U.S. bombing hit an African migrant detention facility in Sada, killing 68. So according to a rough estimate, and I know this doesn't account for all the strikes we've seen this week, at least 226 civilians have been killed in this U.S. bombing campaign in about a month and a half. And the Houthi leaders, the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, they govern an area of Yemen where 80% of Yemenis live. They have repeatedly said that they would only stop attacks on Israel and Israeli shipping if there was a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the Israeli blockade. They have offered to end attacks on U.S. warships, but there's no indication that the Trump administration is interested in that offer. I know I repeat these things a lot, but it's just very important context. All right, so the next one here, the Houthis announce attacks on Israel and on a U.S. aircraft carrier. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saree announced Wednesday that Yemeni forces launched more operations against Israel and the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson as U.S. airstrikes continue to hit Yemen. Saree said Yemeni forces targeted Israel with 4 drones, although at the time that I wrote this, I haven't double-checked in the past couple hours. There was no confirmation from the Israeli side. Usually you see the Israeli military say that they intercepted a missile or a drone. But from my experience tracking this, the Houthis don't just make up attacks usually. I think it's possible that these drones could have been intercepted by U.S. warships in the Red Sea. That's happened before. And or that they just failed to reach their target and just went down somewhere. So Saree also said that the Carl Vinson and its accompanying warships in the Arabian Sea were targeted with multiple drones. And of course, there's no confirmation from the U.S. about that because they haven't shared any details about this war that they're engaged in this part of the world. So this attack on the Carl Vinson, again, so you got 2 aircraft carriers bombing Yemen. The Carl Vinson is in the Arabian Sea and the Harry Truman is in the Red Sea. So it was the other day on Monday when during a Houthi attack, this is according to the U.S. officials, the U.S. side of the story, what U.S. officials told the media. I believe still just anonymous U.S. officials, not like the official line from the Pentagon, but this does seem to be what happened, was that it was during a Houthi attack, the aircraft carrier made a hard turn and the U.S. lost an FA-18 fighter jet overboard, a $60 million jet. And, that indicates that a drone or a missile could have gotten very close to actually hitting the aircraft carrier. So Where were we here? So that's basically it. The more Houthi attacks. This war continues. And there's more U.S. airstrikes in Yemen on Wednesday night, reported in the Hodeidah province on the Red Sea. So the war in Yemen continues. The next one here, the U.S. and Ukraine sign a minerals deal. So on Wednesday, the U.S. and Ukraine signed a deal that will establish a new investment and reconstruction fund to give the U.S. access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals and other natural resources. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said, quote, "I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. The deal allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery." End quote. So it does not appear that Ukraine received any sort of concrete security guarantees under this deal. But this means now that the U.S. has more of an interest in staying involved in the country's affairs. I think this is a way to get the U.S. more bogged down in Ukraine. Bessent said that the agreement, quote, "signals clearly to Russia that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term," end quote. The signing of the deal comes after months of contentious negotiations, which included the Oval Office blow-up between Zelensky and J.D. Vance and President Trump. Trump has been saying that Ukraine owes the U.S. hundreds of billions of dollars for its spending on the proxy war, an idea that Zelensky has rejected. Yulia Svyrdenko, Ukraine's first deputy prime minister who signed the deal with Bessent in Washington, said the agreement did not include any sort of debt repayment. She said, quote, "The agreement does not contain any mention of any debt obligations of Ukraine to the United States. The implementation of the agreement will allow both countries to expand their economic potential through equal cooperation and investment," end quote. So we'll see if more kind of details about the deal come out. But after months, this is one of those things. There's been all these reports, oh, they're about to sign the minerals deal, and then it something fell through. But like when Zelensky was supposed to sign it, I think, what was that, the end of February when he had that argument in the Oval Office? They were supposed to sign it that day, but then he got kicked out of the White House. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky thinks meeting pushed Trump to be tougher on Putin. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Ukrainian President Zelensky believes his Vatican meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump successfully nudged the American leader to take a more aggressive stance toward Russian President Vladimir Putin. Following the meeting with Zelensky, Trump suggested he could add more sanctions on Russia. According to two sources familiar with the 15-minute conversation on Saturday, and this is based on an Axios report, Zelensky told Trump that he would have to put more pressure on Putin to get a deal, and the American leader responded positively to the Ukrainian president's position. After the meeting, Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, "There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying," end quote. So Ukrainians think that Zelensky was successful. So, we've seen all this talk lately about the potential for a deal. It's seeming pretty unlikely. Again, this is all based on, media reports, so it's tough to really know what's happening behind the scenes. But as far as I'm reading things right now, it just doesn't seem like a deal is likely at the moment. And we have seen this rhetoric from the U.S. now that if they don't reach a deal, we're walking away, not our problem. So the question is, does that mean you're going to cut off, stop fueling the war, stop sending weapons and intelligence and sharing intelligence with Ukraine? Now that they signed this mineral deal, giving the U.S. a stake in resources in Ukraine, I think it's less likely that the U.S. would cut off the military aid, but we'll see. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. tells the ICJ that Israel has the right to starve Gaza. So this one is from Kyle again at the Libertarian Institute, and he really wrote a great headline here, really just saying what this is in plain terms. So 2 months into Israel's complete siege of Gaza, an American official argued to the International Court of Justice that Tel Aviv is within its rights to deprive Palestinians of food, medicine, and other aid. Joshua Simmons, a senior legal advisor at the U.S. Department of State, argued to the World Court that international law does not impose any unqualified obligations on an occupying power with respect to humanitarian assistance provided by the UN, international organizations, and third states. The ICJ is holding 5 days of hearings to decide what obligations Israel has to the Palestinians under its military occupation. The UN General Assembly asked the court to consider if Tel Aviv required to allow UN Palestinian Aid Agency, UNRWA, to bring food, medicine, and other basic survival needs into Gaza. Simmons argued that Israel was not required to work with UNRWA to ensure Palestinians have food and other essential goods. He said, quote, "There are serious concerns about UNRWA's impartiality, including information that Hamas has used UNRWA's facilities and that UNRWA staff participated in the October 7th attack against Israel. Occupation law preserves an occupying power's discretion to address its security interests, including the ability to curtail the activities of third states or organizations that are contrary to its security. It is clear that Israel has no obligation to permit UNRWA specifically to provide humanitarian assistance," end quote. So while Israel has repeatedly claimed that UNRWA participated in October 7th, in a UN inquiry found Tel Aviv was unable to substantiate these accusations. And again, this is amid this total Israeli siege. They're not letting any food in. They're not letting any aid in. And the fact is UNRWA is a major provider of this stuff. So if you cut UNRWA out and there's no replacement, people will starve. And now you have people, starving because not a single, as Bezalel Smotrich has said, not a single grain of wheat is going in. So, and this idea, under international law, as I understand it, the occupying power has an extra responsibilities for the people under its occupation. But they're twisting this to say that they don't have to let this aid in. All right, so the next one here, Israeli attacks on Gaza kill 35 more over 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Wednesday that Israeli attacks killed 35 Palestinians and wounded 109 over the previous 24-hour period, as aid groups are warning that people are facing starvation due to the Israeli blockade. Sorry, I should have warned you. There's a rough picture in this story here. So according to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, Israeli strikes on Wednesday included the bombing of the Nusret refugee camp in central Gaza. One strike killed 3 people, including a father, a mother, and their child. And I believe that this is the child who was killed. It was a 1-year-old named Farah Ahmed. Wafa also reported that 3 people, including 2 girls, were killed by Israeli strikes on Jabalia, northern Gaza. On the coast, 1 fisherman was killed by Israeli fire. According to Al Jazeera, Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades, said it was engaged in battles with Israeli troops near Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, and Israeli shelling was reported in the area. The violence in Gaza comes as Israel continues to block humanitarian aid and all other goods from entering Gaza. The UN's World Food Program warned on Wednesday that if the situation did not change, Palestinians will start starving to death. A World Food Program spokeswoman said, quote, "We may see deaths from malnutrition as the crossings remain closed," end quote. So just an absolutely horrific situation that the U.S. is supporting, enabling, and in so many different ways, not just through the military aid and the political backing, but also at the international court. All right, so the next one here, Biden never pressured Israel for a Gaza ceasefire. So this article, this isn't really surprising to anyone who watches this show probably, but former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Herzog, said in an interview that aired on Israeli TV this week that President Biden never pressured Israel to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Herzog said, quote, "God did the state of Israel a favor that Biden was the president during this period because it could have been much worse. We fought in Gaza for over a year and the administration never came to us and said, ceasefire now. It never did, and that's not to be taken for granted," end quote. So his comments contradict claims by President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris's allies who claim that they were working tirelessly for a ceasefire. And I think of AOC. I think she's the one that used that specific term at some Harris campaign event, or maybe it was the DNC. I forget exactly when, but she said, "Oh, they're working tirelessly for a ceasefire," as they're shipping Israel an unprecedented number of weapons and bombs. Just a complete joke. So when a truce deal was reached in January, when the ceasefire deal was reached, the incoming Trump administration's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, was credited being the one who put pressure on Israel to actually reach the deal. At the same time, that deal has completely fallen apart. And it seems like likely, I think it's very clear that what Netanyahu said at the time was true, that the U.S. gave him basically a guarantee that after the first phase, he can completely violate the deal. So his intention was never to implement that whole deal. And that's probably what the Trump administration expected it to go down like this. So anyway, Channel 13 interviewed several former Biden administration officials about Biden's handling of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Tom Nides said that Biden backed Israel all the way despite enormous political pressure. This is some quote here. He said, quote, "This was the most significant political peril of Joe Biden's political career. The easiest thing for Joe Biden to do if he was worried about the votes in Michigan is to basically get a little soft. He refused to do it," end quote. And you hear how he put it there. Just get a little soft. He didn't have to do too much. He could have just said, hey, maybe reach this ceasefire deal, agree to this ceasefire deal, the same one that they ended up agreeing to, months later. And despite Biden's commitment to Israel, Republicans in the U.S. and Netanyahu were being critical of him, claiming that he was not doing enough to support Israel. Nide said, quote, "There was an enormous pressure on Biden inside the White House to change his position. So when I hear comments about how he wasn't good enough or he didn't have Israel's back, am I disgusted by it? 100%. Is it true? 100% no," end quote. The Biden officials said that they were frustrated when with Netanyahu for attacking the administration for withholding a significant number of weapons, which was not the case. They weren't doing this. There was a single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs that the administration was withholding, but apparently, according to this, they were ready to release it, to give it to Israel in June 2024, but it remained frozen due to Netanyahu's accusations. Not because they were killing all these civilians. They withheld the bomb shipment because of what Netanyahu said. So Ilan Goldenberg, who was a senior national security aide for the administration, said, quote, "Yes, we had a disagreement over one shipment, but to go out and attack us that way was particularly infuriating," end quote. So Biden often identifies himself as a Zionist and a staunch supporter of Israel. Because of that, Nides said that the accusations that he was not providing enough support for Israel really aggravated Biden. He said it aggravated him, and the words he used, he said it pissed him off so much that you didn't even want to be around him when it happened. That's how much of a Zionist, of a staunch Israel backer Biden is, that if anybody questions that, man, you don't even want to be around him. So, and I think, that was clear from watching what was unfolding, but just confirmation of what Biden did for that year. All right, so the next one here, documentary on Israeli settlers triggers online firestorm. So this article's from Middle East Eye. I really just put this up because I wanted to get people's attention on this documentary from Louis Theroux, the British documentarian. It's called The Settlers. And essentially what he does is he goes and he speaks to settlers in the West Bank and just lets them talk. And it really is very revealing, some of the things that they say. He spoke a lot with Daniela Weiss, who we've talked about on this show. She's been leading this push to settle Gaza, to for ethnic cleansing and Jewish settlement in Gaza. But she's been behind the push for settlements for decades in Israel. And she talks about how, essentially the Israeli military helped her with all these dreams of settlement expansion. And you get to see the day-to-day life for Palestinians living under the occupation a bit. And it's really good. So it's BBC, and it's like, if you live in the UK, you could watch it on the BBC's thing. I watched it, some random Twitter account just shared the whole thing. It's like about an hour long. So maybe I'll put the link in the description. I'll try to remember. One of my pet peeves is when you listen to a show, listen to a podcast, and they say, oh, there'll be a link in the description, and then it's not there. So I'm going to try my best to remember to include that link. But it's definitely worth watching. It's about an hour, and it's really good. All right, so the next one here, Israel uses Druze as pretext to strike Damascus. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So sectarian fighting in the Damascus suburb of Jarrah Mana left at least 18 dead yesterday, and Israel is already looking to parlay that into a new excuse for military action against the Syrian government, with the idea that they need to protect the Druze minority militarily. So they're using the Druze as a pretext for more military action, and they're trying to use the Druze as to justify their continued occupation of southern Syria. So when they hear about sectarian fighting, hey, it's our opportunity to take some more territory. That's probably how they're thinking here. So the Israeli military reported attacking a Damascus suburb and claimed that they targeted an extremist group that was planning new attacks on the Druze. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz issued statements demanding the Syrian government take action to prevent further attacks on the Druze. And they certainly are in a perilous situation with this new extremist HTS-led government and the fighters that we've seen. We've seen the crackdown on the Alawites, the massacres of the Alawites. But it's very clear what Israel's doing here. All right, and another thing I mentioned it in the Houthi, the Yemen drone attack story. There was I'm sure a lot of people are aware of these huge wildfires around Jerusalem, which they're saying they're like the biggest in decades, or the biggest in the state of Israel's history. And there's all these claims. I mean, people making all claims about people setting fires. I just don't think there's any evidence to really even address them at this point. But it does seem like that's something Israel's certainly potentially distracted by when it comes to the Houthi drones. If they did intercept them, they might not have reported it right away. Anyway, the next one here, the U.S. sends general to Lebanon for ceasefire monitoring. This is another one from Jason. So the U.S. Embassy has announced that Major General Michael Leaney will be the new top U.S. military official monitoring the ceasefire in Lebanon. He will replace Major General Jasper Jeffers, who previously held that post. The embassy's statement emphasized Major General Leaney will work to support Lebanese sovereignty. It's not clear if the timing of this replacement has anything to do with the thousands of violations of the ceasefire committed by Israel since it took effect in November. The mention of sovereignty might suggest the U.S. is opposed to the ongoing Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon, though it has not specifically said so. Major General Jeffers repeatedly praised Israel during the ceasefire and conspicuously never mentioned plain violations that were ongoing. And Lebanon is pressing for the U.S. and France to do something about these constant violations. A new general probably won't really change the scenario there. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. fires HIMARS into the South China Sea. So the U.S. military fired munitions into the South China Sea this week using HIMARS rocket systems amid soaring tensions with China in the region. So these are typically, this has been a big weapon that Ukraine's gotten from the U.S. that they've used a lot against Russia. This is, typically it's a land-based rocket system that is typically fired against targets on land. But in this case, they're firing at targets in the sea, and that sea happened to be the South China Sea. So these live fire drills occurred on the Philippine island province of Palawan as part of the annual U.S.-Philippine Balikatan exercise, which has involved 9,000 U.S. troops, 5,000 Philippine soldiers, 260 Australian service members, and smaller deployments from Japan, France, the UK, and several other countries. So according to the Philippine Armed Forces Western Command, the live fire drills involved U.S., Philippine, and Australian troops and were conducted in Rizal, a municipality on Palawan's west coast, which is on the South China Sea. Philippine forces also fired missiles and artillery into the sea. So a U.S. Marine Corps spokesman told Stars and Stripes that the HIMARS were fired at set targets in the sea. And so this is a very big drill exercise, the Balikatan, that the U.S. and the Philippines do. I believe it's about 2 weeks long. They've also done drills in the northern Philippine provinces that are across from Taiwan. And the U.S. has deployed a new missile system on top of the HIMARS for these drills, the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System that has a range of about 100 miles. It's an anti-ship system, so that could be used for targets in the South China Sea. And last year, the U.S. deployed a Typhoon missile system for these Balikatan exercises. And the Typhoon missile system is very controversial. This is a land-based system that can fire Tomahawk missiles, which have a range of over 1,000 miles. So that means if they're in the Philippines, they could hit mainland China. They are also It would have been banned under the INF treaty, the treaty that the first Trump administration withdrew from in 2019 that banned medium-range land-based missiles. So China was very unhappy about the Typhoon missile system being sent there for the drills, and it's still there. It was kind of sent. They said, "Oh, we're sending it for the Balakatan," but over a year later, it's still there. So that suggests that this other missile system and the HIMARS also aren't going anywhere, as tensions are really rising between China and the Philippines over their maritime dispute in the South China Sea. The U.S. has really been increasing support for the Philippines in this area. And this is important for us Americans because the U.S. and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty. And the U.S. always says that it applies to attacks on Philippine boats in the South China Sea. And the Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard always have these encounters. So the U.S. is basically saying if this maritime dispute turns hot, then they will intervene. So it's an important area for us to keep an eye on. All right, so the next one here, Mohsen Mahdawi released from ICE detention. So this article is from Zeteo. I feel like I always pronounce their name wrong. Zeteo by Prem Thacker. So this is good news here. So Palestinian Columbia University student Mohsen Mahdawi has been released from ICE detention. On Wednesday, a judge denied the government's request to pause his release and ordered him to be freed on bail pending a legal challenge to the government's detention of the Palestinian Columbia student. In the first place, the Trump administration is attempting to deport him on spurious charges of compromising U.S. foreign policy. So they're attempting to deport him for his political views, for his speech, his involvement in protests. So this is good that he was able to get out. You have Mahmoud Khalil still in detention, even though his American wife just had a baby, just had his baby. So they're still going to try to deport him, but at least he's out on bail and he doesn't have to rot away behind bars. And he was Mahdawi was a green card permanent resident, and he actually, when ICE arrested him, was when he went in I don't know where he was in the process, but he went in something related to him getting citizenship. And then that's when they detained him. All right, so the last story here. Pakistan claims that it has intel India will strike in 36 hours. So this is from CNN. This is a publication we don't usually run stories from, but I thought this was fine. Tensions between India and Pakistan have escalated further after a top Pakistani official claimed early Wednesday to have credible intelligence that New Delhi will carry out a military action against Islamabad within the next 2 days. The claim came as both the U.S. and China have urged restraint. So this is Pakistan's information minister said, quote, Pakistan has credible intelligence that India intends carrying out military action against Pakistan in the next 24 to 36 hours, end quote. So his comments come just 1 week after militants massacred 26 tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir, a rampage that has sparked widespread outrage. I believe all but one of them were Indian tourists. And India has accused Pakistan of being involved in the attack, a claim Pakistan is denying. Pakistan has offered a neutral investigation into the incident. And so they started taking kind of retaliatory measures. India started taking these measures against Pakistan, and Pakistan started retaliating. And tensions are really high. There's been exchanges of fire between Pakistani and Indian troops in Kashmir. As far as I know, there haven't been casualties. I haven't been following it too closely, but tensions remain very high between these two nuclear-armed countries. All right, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Norman Solomon. The Vietnam and Gaza wars shattered young illusions about U.S. leaders. One from Joseph Terwilliger. The marketplace of ideas only works if we leave the doors open. One from Ramsey Baroud. The myth of conquest. Why Gaza will never be subdued by Israel. One from Scott McConnell. An Iran war would consume Trump's presidency. And our spotlight from Daniel Larison. Israel's deliberate starvation of Gaza. So go check that out. And so I did the debate on the streaming platform Civil just a couple hours before I recorded this show. That's why I'm still all dressed up, although I should get dressed up for you people who watch this show too. But I debated against a guy from the FDD, very hawkish think tank, about regime change in Iran. It was tough to nail him down on anything. I thought I did all right. But you could go check that out. I'll put that link. I know they have it on their Twitter account, so I'll put that link in the description. And I also did Dave Smith's show, Part of the Problem, which was really awesome. I'm sure people know who Dave Smith is. He's really blown up in recent weeks because of the debate. I wouldn't even really call it a debate that he did with Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan. So I went on there. We talked a lot about Yemen. I really wanted to get more attention on this this catastrophic bombing campaign and these massacres of civilians. And Dave obliged me and had me on his show to talk about that. And we talk about some other things, some stuff about Murray and the situation in the Middle East. So I'll put a link to that in the description. I got 3 links to add, and I promise that they'll all be there. I think that's everything. I had kind of a big, busy day today, but I'm recording this late Wednesday night, right before midnight. So anyway, that's it. Follow us on social media, like, subscribe, comment. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.